So this is the practical application post for my episode titled Running Biomechanics with Heather Milton. A couple of my big takeaways. To start off with, I just want to understand what we're talking about when I say running biomechanics. I'm specifically talking about distance running, right? So there's a difference between walking, distance running, and sprinting. Walking, you have 2 feet on the ground. Once you are now in flight, which means you have 1 foot on the ground at a time, you now go into running. But sprinting would be high intensity, short duration type of running. And distance running, you're going to now start to pace yourself. And when you're pacing yourself, your biomechanics are going to look different than a sprint. So this episode is all about distance running. Any run that's about more than a mile, that would be, for example, 4 laps around a track. Anything more than that, you start to go into the realm of distance running. Sprinting is probably somewhere between about 1/4 of the track, which is a straightaway, and then a full lap around. And then you have mid-distance and then again long distance. But we're specifically talking about the long distance type of running where you're pacing yourself. So we'll start with the lower body mechanics first. Generally speaking, what you're looking for here, and then we'll go through kind of each joint, but you want the foot to land pretty much under the center of mass or close to it and then be extending behind you, as opposed to reaching far out in front and then having a long time on the ground and extending behind. So think about the hands on a clock. If the foot lands at the 8 o'clock and then it goes all the way to 6 and then extends behind all the way to 4. That's a long arc. It's a long time that foot is going to be on the ground. And we are trying to minimize the ground reaction forces for the sake of injury. And then the other thing we're trying to do is maximize on efficiency and running economy, where we're not wasting any energy that we don't need to. So those are the big 2 things we're trying to do. But so we want the foot to land more at that 6 o'clock as opposed to the 8. The 8 means we're overstriding and we're reaching out in front. When we reach out in front, we have a really stiff leg or a straighter leg. When the leg is straighter, you're kind of putting out a bit of a braking force. Your center of mass is behind you, which puts a lot of stress on the leg. The other piece is that the joint is going to absorb more of that impact because the leg is so stiff. Whereas when you have a soft landing or a soft knee, a slight flex in the knee, the muscles are going to absorb that a bit more. But again, if you're reaching out in front, it's going to be very hard to flex that knee. And you're going to want to, when you have the foot under the body at that 6 o'clock, it's going to have that knee flexion that you want a bit more. And then at the hip, you want the hip to be extending behind you, or she said, push the ground behind you. And you want that hip to be able to extend as well. So, but starting at the foot, so, a little bit of a different consideration here, but you want to have supination to pronation. So you want to have this rolling action. I understood that really well as a judo player. We do a lot of falls and rolls, and one of the things we say is, like when we do the back roll, for example, you're going to rock like a rocking chair, right? So you have this rolling action as opposed to landing flat on the ground like a pancake, or think like a belly flop on the water. You belly flop and you land flat, and that's going to be a pretty painful landing. Whereas when you have this rolling action, you kind of disperse the force a bit, and it's a healthier way to land. So that's what's happening on the foot here. You're kind of getting this little roll. You can over-pronate, which is a problem, or you can land flat like a pancake, and that is also a problem. If you notice that your foot, you could actually go to a running store and they can assess and see how you're running and recommend a shoe for you based on your foot. But, so you can go and they have things like stability shoes or stuff like that. So this way you can have a better shoe for your foot. Little, thing to keep in mind that she mentioned and I loved. She said, whatever recommendations given to you, make sure the shoe feels comfortable. Comfort usually wins when it comes to injury prevention. So consider comfort no matter what recommendation is given to you. So that's at the foot. At the knee, these are all things I kind of mentioned already, but just reiterating, you want the knee to be slightly flexed a bit. And at the hip level, you want it to be able to extend behind you. But the big piece there, or the big A cue that she gave was having a soft landing, or if you think about like moving, quietly as you're running a bit, your foot is naturally, or your stride will shorten naturally, and you'll have that knee flexion that you want there. Another big piece that she mentioned was cadence manipulation. And cadence is manipulation, that's how many steps per minute you're taking. So your pace is made up of your stride length, how far you're reaching the leg out, and then your steps per minute, how many steps you take within that minute. So most healthy athletes have somewhere around 180 steps per minute, she was saying. And that's not an exact number. You don't have to try to get to that exact number, but that's about a good number to play with. So if you're at, let's say, 150 steps per minute, and you're able to increase to 180, what's starting to happen is that your stride length is starting to shorten. You don't want to shorten it too much, but you want to shorten it just enough to hit that sweet spot. So by shortening your stride length, that is a good thing, because your foot is starting to land under your body, your knee is starting to flex, you're extending behind you, you're not overreaching. All those big things that we're looking for are kind of starting to happen. You could also find some good music that has like 180 beats per minute, right? You could hear it on your soundtrack, and you can step to the beat there. Try not to increase too much too soon. You don't want to go from 150 to 180 tomorrow. You want to slowly increase this stuff. So we'll move on to upper body now. Generally speaking, with the upper body, you want to be a bit stiff, and you want to be going forward. And let me explain what I mean by that. You don't want to have any wasted energy up or side to side. So one thing is called vertical oscillation. So your head is kind of bobbing up and down. You're not going up. That's going to be wasted energy. It's also going to increase the amount of, force that you're, putting on the joints there. So you want to be going forward. You don't want to have any head bob. With the torso, you don't want to be rocking side to side. You want it to be nice and stiff. You could even have a little bit of a lean forward and be going forward. With the arms, you don't want them running across your body. You want the elbow to shoot straight back, right? So that those arms are going straight forward and back. So generally speaking, that upper body, you don't want to waste energy moving up or moving to the side in any way. You want to be going forward. And then you want to be stiff enough that the energy from the ground is being transferred and sending you forward. Think about it like a basketball, right? So if the basketball is deflated and you go to bounce it, it doesn't have much rebound. But the more air you fill in it and you go to bounce that ball, and boom, it has a nice rebound to it. So the stiffness that you have is also going to help propel that energy from the ground and send you forward. You still need some elasticity, right? You don't want to be so stiff that you're like a wooden block and you throw that on the ground and it doesn't rebound at all. So you don't want to be too over stiff, but generally speaking, you want to inflate that ball. You want to be stiff enough that you're maximizing on the amount of energy that's being transferred. So again, generally speaking, stiff and forward. So those are the big technical components that you want to think of. But now you might be thinking in your head, so all right, I can see what I might be doing well or not well, but is it even fixable? And I would say yes, all these things are fixable, and there's many different solutions, and it's important to use an expert to help you figure out which solution would be best for you. But some examples could include some things are learned behavior, is what Heather mentioned. So for example, if you played lacrosse and you were running with the stick, your arm probably was driving across your body, and you can, unlearn that. There's ways to practice it. You could sit down on the ground and just practice and isolate the movement that you're trying to work on. Sometimes it is a stability issue, and you need to do some core exercises, right? So if you have a weak core and you're rocking side to side and your arms are flailing around and all of that as well. So sometimes it's a strength issue. Sometimes it's a flexibility issue. So for example, that hip flexor, the hip flexor is, the front side of the hip. So when we're trying to get that hip to extend, we need it to go back. And if the hip flexor is tight, it might not be able to go back the way we want. Maybe you sit a lot at work and you don't stretch that muscle, and you lack something there. But then some things could be bigger problems. Maybe you had an injury or some type of trauma or an overuse injury, and your body is not able to get into certain positions, and some things might take more time or more work. So be patient with yourself, especially for adults. Some things could take a couple months, could take a couple years. Some things could, I don't want to say be overnight, but something could be a little bit quicker. I use the analogy a lot of times of kids being like wet concrete and adults being like solid concrete. The best time to mold, behaviors and techniques and motor skills and all this stuff is in youth. But as you become an adult, you need a little bit more of an axe and a chisel because you're like solid concrete, but you still are changeable and you can fix your technique, you can work on it, and it is a worthy investment. Last couple pieces to think about, some health considerations. I know most people who tune into my episode, it could be for performance, but also most of us are considering health as well. Know that, she gave a couple good numbers, over 40 miles a week. Once you do more than 40 miles a week, you're substantially increasing your risk of injury. Now, this is not to deter you from your goal, right? If you're running a marathon, it's likely at some point you're going to be running more than 40 miles a week. And, just understand that difference. In my life, there's many things that were worth the sacrifice. There's many risks that I've taken. Big shout out to my buddy Joe, who uses or really put me onto the term of calculated risks. So, make sure you take calculated risks, but I think some things are worth the risk, right? That's part of life. You shouldn't just, I always say you can die on the couch or you can die off it. And I'd rather die off the couch. I think it's a better way to go. Now, that's not saying to be stupid, but again, some things are worth the sacrifice. This is not to deter you from your goals. It's just to understand at what point health and performance start to differentiate a bit there, and to understand at what point you are making a bit more of that sacrifice. The other thing to think about is you never want to increase your volume from week to week more than 10 to 30%. She said 10%. I say somewhere between 10 and 30. She's the expert runner. Maybe runners are, taking a little more precaution there. But with either way, there's no doubt that somewhere within that range, if you will use the example of 100 miles per week. Let's say you ran 100 miles this week and you then the next week run 140 miles. That's a major jump. You're likely going to experience some pain or maybe an injury that could come with that. Maybe you don't. Maybe you get lucky. But, you're definitely increasing that risk. So be careful to properly progress. If you miss a workout, you cannot make up for it. You just have to stay the course and properly progress. Last thing was about being, still in the realm of health, but about taking a seasonal approach. So you don't want to always be running from one marathon to another and just be going all out intensity all year long. You want to have a time where you're in season and you're working hard, and another time where you're off season and giving your body a chance to recover. You could switch and be in season in something else, but you just don't want to stay with the same thing all year long. So like maybe in the fall, summer and fall, that's where I go hard with running. Maybe in the spring I do rock climbing or something else or whatever it is. But have a seasonal approach. Give your body an opportunity to recover from the high intensity work that you're doing. So those are a couple of my big takeaways. I hope you all enjoyed it. I hope you tune into the episode. Heather really dives in deep with each of these components that I mentioned, and this is just a brief overview for now. So tune in. I hope to catch you soon.